The Song of Roland is a wonderful piece of medieval poetry. It's part of what your text described as the Songs of Deeds. In fact, it's one of the first ones. It has two time periods that we're interested in. One is the time of Charlemagne, and the other is the time of the First Crusades, when this was probably put together. And so let's talk a little bit about the Song of Roland as you get a chance to read it. When we were talking about Beowulf, we mentioned that there was this relationship, this feudal relationship between the lords and the knights, that it was the lord's responsibility to protect and provide for the knight and to give liberally to those who are under his care. And he was responsible for living a life worthy of respect, the kind of respect that a knight would show. The knight's responsibility was to fight for and protect the Lord, even when it meant self-sacrifice. He was to give respect and honor to the Lord and to serve him faithfully. So we saw that in Beowulf already, and we see it now in the Song of Roland. Historically, Charlemagne was working at retreating from the area that is mentioned here, the Pyrenees Mountains, and as a result of the tragedy that we're reading, that area called Spanish March was put together with, refortified by Charlemagne to protect against the Basques who would be pushing up toward France. So that's the historical perspective. What we find, though, in the Song of Roland is not history, but myth. We know this because we have Einhard's Life of Charlemagne, which some of your siblings are probably watching or reading in Omnibus 5. But Einhard says that this was an undertaking against, it was the Basques who attacked. It was a relatively minor skirmish, but it was a defeat for Charlemagne. And when we get to the Song of Roland, that story has exploded into epic proportions. Here's what George Grant said. The composer got nearly all the facts terribly wrong. Charlemagne was not yet the emperor during this battle. The bandits who slaughtered the rear guard of the army were Basques, not Saracens. The invasion of the Spanish Moors was but a brief expedition, not a 7-year-long campaign. Revenge for the ambush was never undertaken, and the rivalry between Roland and Ganelon never happened, so far as we know. In fact, there is good reason to suspect that the two men were not even alive at the same time. So here's our problem. Song of Roland is a wonderful story, and it is working with oral elements that people know the story of Charlemagne. They know the major characters involved, and it is the poet who is now reworking that history for a contemporary issue. So the historical date of the battle is August 15th, 778, and the story of the Song of Roland was probably written down in between 1098 and 1100. So most scholars believe that the story, written during the First Crusade, was meant to underscore the threat Islam posed to Christian Europe, right? So the characters of the history are being repurposed to explain the need for contemporary faithfulness and to underscore the prejudices that are already there. So that's what Song of Roland is setting out to do. It's rather like in great books in the ancient world. We looked at the Aeneid, and in this, Virgil was doing an interesting thing. Virgil was taking the heroes of Greek epic and repurposing them for a Roman audience and for a contemporary political concern. So the reason he told this story in the way that he did was not just to take the characters and the stories of Greek legend, but to repurpose them for a Roman audience, and to tell this story at this time was to open the eyes of his audience to a contemporary concern that needed to be addressed. And Virgil could do all of that because of his skill in storytelling and in drama. So the same thing is happening here with the Song of Roland. People know the basic elements, the stories are already known in people's minds and hearts. And so what the poet is doing, the poet who is anonymous, the art is in the new presentation of familiar themes to address the contemporary situation, which is the preaching of that first crusade. And what this song will underscore the menace of the Saracens. So that's what this story is being repurposed in order to do. So you can tell in the story that some of the characters have been changed. They have become ideal characters. Charlemagne has gone from somebody who is not yet emperor, but an excellent ruler, and he is now a perfect leader. He is now 200 years old, and he is a man of feeling for the time. He is everything that you would want a ruler to be in that mindset during that time. Roland is the rash, arrogant, generous, outspoken, loyal leader of his men and the romantic hero to his audience. So whatever his character actually was, he is now that young man in whom we are putting all of our hope and our trust for the future, right? Oliver is his best friend, the prudent, wise companion that gives advice to sort of blunt some of the more obvious emotional excesses of youth in Roland. Oliver is there to try to temper that. Turpin is a good churchman. He is the one who stands with Roland and Oliver in the end. He is not only pastor, but warrior. And then Ganelon has gone from, his character has been repurposed to the perfect villain, the jealous betrayer. And as far as we know from Einhard and from others, the relationship between Roland and Ganelon is totally fiction, as we've seen. So this story is idealism on betray. It's the best kind of king, the best kind of hero, the best kind of villain, all put together into the best kind of legendary epic story. It's like a superhero story, only this one turns out to be a tragedy. The author has woven 3 different wars together. There is this private war of personalities, Roland and Ganelon, and then there is the fight between France, the Franks, Charlemagne, and this time now the Saracens, who are the Muslim people. And it is not just that national war, but it turns into this ideological conflict between the cross and the crescent, and how the Muslim advance is a threat to Europe. Do you see what we have? The story is being repurposed to meet a contemporary concern. And so as Pope Urban wanders about preaching the First Crusade, this story comes in to back up the threat. So it's a story that's 300 years old, and it's being retold wrongly, but for the purpose of helping Europe to wake up to the threat that the writer believes is coming to them and to Europe through the Muslim advance. So that's how this story is being repurposed. So here's a question that I want to ask, and maybe we'll take this up in class, but it says this: history can be, this is George Grant again, history can be, after all, not so much what actually happened as it is what we think happened. As a result, fictionalized legends like this one can often have more influence than careful historiography or careful pursuit of accurate history. The fictionalized legend can have more influence than accurate history can. Now, what do you think of that? I believe that the best way to serve man is to record his accurate history. To bend it and to warp it for your own purpose is to tear down statues, to tear down memorials. I'm a firm believer in leaving Dachau where it stands. Just as one example, Dachau has been rebuilt lit up, not because we want to honor Hitler, but precisely because we want to remember the horrors that happened at that concentration camp. And by leaving Dachau where it is, showing the horrors that happened, it's accurate history, and it serves as a warning. When we start messing with history, we are going to end up forgetting finally and ultimately who we are and where we have been. So I hope that you will enjoy Song of Roland. There's lots of sword play, lots of fighting, lots of chivalry, idealistic, wonderful, larger-than-life characters. So you'll enjoy the story, but keep in mind there's a difference between how this story is being used and what the accurate history was, because that's going to be important. Along with this video, make sure that you watch the video on chivalry, because it's going to be an essential part of our story as well. Thanks for listening.